Hey guys, in today's video I want to teach you the basics of TypeScript. So we're going to be first looking at TypeScript on its own. For those of you who don't know what TypeScript is, it's developed by the guys over at Microsoft, and what it is that it allows us to add types to React, not to React, but to actually JavaScript, and then through JavaScript we can also add it to React. So initially I'm going to show you guys how to just get started with TypeScript alone, and then I'm going to add it into React in a very basic little project. So to get started, you want to head over to codesandbox.io. You want to click create a sandbox. So this is just so we don't have to set up our own sandbox or our own local environment. So the first thing you want to do is just click on this. So it's vanilla plus TS. So you'll be brought to a page like this. I'm just going to close this. So I just removed the I think it was rendering a div. So let's get started with the variable types. And actually, just before I get started with that, two things. First, we have a tsconfig file. .json file. So this is just some very basic configuration for TypeScript. We can overwrite this with our own stuff. I'm not going to change any of this. You can look into the TypeScript documentation to see exactly what all of this means. I'm just going to leave it as it is for now. And you might also notice that the files are actually .ts instead of .js. So what you will notice is that we normally have .js and .jsx. And so TypeScript, the equivalents are .ts and .tsx. So tsx is for the React stuff, and ts is just for normal TypeScript files. So let's get started with basic variable declarations. So if I was to create a variable, and I'm going to use let, so let my name equal to, and then just John. So from this, and the error right now is just because we're not actually using it, so I can just do console log my name, and that goes away. So from this, if I hover over it, you can see that TypeScript is inferring this as a type of string, and we can also do this ourselves. So type string, so we use the semicolon here, and then specify the type. So this can be string. If I was to try something like number, if I hover over this, John is not assignable to type number. So if I was to change this to 12, for example, you can see that now it's working fine. And I'll open the console here, just so you can see there is indeed console logging it. So this is how we declare a type in TypeScript. Most of the time when you're doing something like this, you don't actually need to, because TypeScript can infer it for you, and then later on we will try to overwrite that. So let's just change this back to John. Here if I set it to Jane, you can see that it's working fine. If I was to, however, try and set this to let's say 12, we're getting an error again because type 12, so number, is not assignable to string. So what we could do here is say this is string, or, and then we use the single pipe symbol, or number. So now currently it's fine, and if we hover over this, you can see it is keeping that. So this works now, but let's say if I set this to an array, no, it doesn't work. So the way that we would set it to an array is just say array. Oh, that's for thing. It's just an empty array. So array, when we do this is generally for when we use generics, which I will go over later. So yeah, now we're saying this is fine as well, and then we have other things like objects, where we specify say name. Actually, I'll show you guys that in its own one. Objects are a little bit, we can do some special stuff with objects. So yeah, so that's how we would declare a basic type of a variable. And one more thing, we can also declare the type as an actual string. So name John is John, and so here, even if I set this to a valid string like Jane, we're still gonna get an error because Jane is not assignable to type John. So the type itself can be a string, not just the type of string, if that makes sense. Okay, so now looking into object types and array types. So let's just say, let's create a object called person, and let's say they have a name of John and an age of 21, and let's also console log it just to remove the error. So right now if I hover over this, you can see it infers that person is, this variable person is of type object, which has a name and a name of string and age of number. So we could also go out of our own way to define this. So name string, and let me just make this multiline, so name string and age number. So now if we were to, let's say, remove this age property, we are now getting an error if I hover over this. So property age is missing in type, and this is our current type. So currently we just have name, but required in type, and you can see here it is required. So what if I said that age is optional? I would just put a question mark here, and then now if I hover over this, the question mark just adds a pipe, so an or undefined. So now we can set age to undefined, and that still works fine. Or we can set it to 21, or string won't work because we haven't said that it's string. We can do that by specifying string. So now 21 works as well. And if I hover over this, we get string, number, undefined. Okay, so moving on to arrays. The way we would do an array is, let me just create an array called my array, set it to a empty array, and just console log it. Now let's say, so I'm going to specify the type as an array, and let's say I want this to be an array of numbers. So I would do like 12, 13, 14. So now this is working fine, but let's say I wanted to add in a string here. Just call it string. If I hover over this, string is not assignable type number. So what we'd have to do is say array number or string, and this still won't work because it will now say that these numbers aren't working, but that's just because we have to wrap this in parentheses. It's now saying this array is of type either number or string. So I hope that makes sense. It's fairly intuitive. And now what if we wanted an object? So we just specify an object here, and let's change this. So it's going to be an object which has name, which is going to be a string, and age, number. So now if I add something in, if I add an object, we get autocomplete, so we can see age, and age has to be a number, so 21. And then if I hover over this now, you can see we get an error because name is missing. So let's add in name as well, John. So that is how we do the basic, how we create an array of objects. So I hope that makes sense. It's not too confusing. This is really basic stuff. So that should be it for the variable type. So we've gone over numbers, strings, objects, arrays. Booleans. Booleans are very, very simple. What we do is specify, let's just call this my boolean, and console log my boolean. So this, let me just set this to false initially. We just specify here boolean. So now this can be false, true or false. And if I try set it to anything else, we get an error. So only true and false don't give us errors. I think that should be it for the basic variable types. Now moving on, let's go to functions. So for functions, let's first start off by creating a normal function. So my function, and then here let's say this is actually let's call this function console log helper or something, and it's going to take in, or just console log number. It's going to take in a number, and it's just going to console log that number. And then let's just call this here console log number, and let's say 12. So right now num has implicit type any, so we have to specify the type of this. So similar to how we do it for a variable, we put the semicolon and then just say number. So now this is working fine. Let's say we also wanted to return something here as well, so return num. If I hover over this, you can see the type is of num, takes a parameter of num, which is of type number, and the return type here is actually number. And the way that we specifically set the return type is using a semicolon here and then number. So if I was to say string here, and let's just change this to num to string, and then we just return num dot to string. So now we're getting no complaints from Typescript because we specified the input as a number and the output or the return value as a string. And inside here we can just do whatever we want with the number, like increment it or pretty much anything. And then just to make sure this is working, I'm just going to do console log num to string 12. And then we get 13 because here we increment it. Just remove that, and then yeah, we get 12. And then we could also do type of, and you can see we're getting string here. So it is indeed returning a string, and that's because we're forcing it to do so. And if we were to once again remove this, we get an error saying type number is not assigned with a type string. So I'm just going to leave this here for now, because we're going to go through interfaces and types next, and they link in with functions, and generics also do the same thing and link in with functions. Okay, so an interface, the way I like to think of it is like a schema. So if any of you guys come from a backend background, schema is sort of like the structure of the data. So let's create an interface here. So we just specify interface. So this is new to, this isn't something that exists in JavaScript, so this might be quite new to you. So interface, and then we give the interface a name. So I'm just going to call it person. And let's say person, and then we specify, and then we just put curly braces. And person, so it's going to be an object which has a name of string and age of number. So this right now alone doesn't do anything. So now I'm going to create a variable called person1, and then just set this to an empty object, but I want this to be of type person. So now if I hover over this, we get an error saying type empty object is missing the following properties from type person. There's missing age and name. So now let's add those in. So I can do age, and you can see we're getting autocomplete on the, which is not something you normally get when you're creating a object. So age 12 and name John. So now we're just getting the error because we're not actually doing anything with it. So if I just console log person1, the error goes away. So here we're actually just creating a schema of sorts. So we're declaring the type of this person1 in using person. So then the reason we do this is, let's say we're to create person2, I can set this of type person as well and say age 30 and then name Jane. And then let's also console log that. So now you can see person2 is of the same type. So before, what we would have had to do is we would have had to just copy this, paste it here, so this is acceptable and this is acceptable. And then we wouldn't have this. So instead of repeating ourselves, we're just going to create an interface which handles it. Okay, so now one more thing I just want to show you guys with these interfaces is how we would deal with a function or a method. So let's say we had a function here called print name, and this is just going to be a function where all we're going to do is console log the name, so this dot name. And right now you can see we're getting an error. So type age num, so the current type, which is age, name, and print name, is not assignable to the type person, which the reason we're getting this is because we don't have the print name here. So print name, I'm going to put a question mark here to say that it's optional, is going to have a object, a function here. We're just going to return void, so pretty much nothing, and it's not going to accept any parameters either. So that's how we would set up a function here, a method. We would just do it normally, so we specify the name of the property, so the key, and then the value would be an object, a function where we have the parameters here and the return type here, which is a void. And then here we don't need it because we specify that this is optional. So I hope that makes sense. So now types are similar to interfaces, although there are some slight differences. So let's create a type here, and let's call this okay, yeah, what we can do is if you guys know API requests, so in an API request we have certain methods. Let's say acceptable methods. Sorry, this should be type acceptable methods. So acceptable methods, and then we can specify this as, let's say, string. But I actually want to do it as a string. So as the value of the string, not the type of string. So I'll show you guys what I mean. So let's say we have post and put, and let's just say get as well. So now let's say we have these three types, and let's say we had a function here called make request, and it's just going to return, well, we'll just leave it empty for now. And let's say it accepted a method. So what I can do is say make request, and it's going to make this request, and then we want the type of this method. We know that there are only certain types, so we know that we can't do a make request because that doesn't exist. So we can specify the types here and then set this to acceptable types, acceptable methods. Then here, if you press Control and space, you can see that we get some, at the top here, we get some values. So these are all of the possible values. So it's nice for autocomplete. So let's say get. So that is how we would use these types to specify a, let's say like static types of a method. We can also use this to, let's say, create, this could also be used the same way as we use it here for an object. So we can just copy and paste this over and say person type, and then we can just do the same thing. So person3 is of type person type, and you can see this works the same way. This error is just because we're not using it for anything. So types and interfaces are quite similar, as you guys might be able to tell. One of the things that you can do with interfaces that you can't do with types is, if I just remove all of this, actually I kind of want to keep it. Actually it's fine, let's remove it for now. So what we can do with an interface is we can create interface person with details, let's see. Now person with details, what I want this to do is extends person. So now let's just say person with details has an email, which is a string, and let's just say reference number, which is just a number. So now if I was to create a person and give this the type of person with details, here we would need name, John, we would need age, 21, we don't need the print name, that's optional, but email is also required, because if I remove email and I hover over this, so name and age is missing the following properties from a person with details, so email and reference number. So with the extend, with interfaces, we're able to extend an existing interface and add our own properties to it, so they merge into one. And then this is something that we can't do with types. So this is one of the big differences between types and interfaces. Although most of the time I prefer to use interfaces, I almost never use types. Just the only time that I've actually used types in practice is using the acceptable methods of post, get, put, patch, and some of the other ones. Okay, so now let's move on to generics. So the way that generics work is we can assign a type that we don't know about yet to a parameter, for example. So that might actually sound a bit vague and confusing, so instead I'm going to show you with an example. Let's say I have a function called join with commas, and it's going to take an array. And let's just say for now it's going to be an array of strings. And what it's going to do is it's going to return just a string. Although we don't have to specify that because Typescript will infer that. But I'm just going to specify it myself anyway. So join with commas, what it's going to do is return array.join, and then it's just going to join them all with a comma. Now let's say join with commas, let's create an array, so this has to be an array of strings, so let's just say this is name, so like John, and then Jane. Let me actually console log this. So you can see John and Jane, and it's being joined through a comma. Now what if we wanted to do this with 21 and like 32 or something? Well, it's working here, but oh, that's because these are strings. let me just convert them to numbers. So it's still working, and that's because of the environment that Code Sandbox uses. It isn't going to throw an error, but if your environment is different, it actually would throw an error and you would see the error. But instead we're seeing the error here. So type number is not assigned with type string. But when we think about it, this actually wouldn't make a difference. If in pure JavaScript, you can see that it's still working. So you might be thinking, oh, well, we can just do this. We can say or number. And if you know that these are the only two types you're ever going to get, then that's actually perfectly fine solution. But instead, what I want to show you guys is generics. So I'm also going to remove the return type because it's not necessary. So what if we put just a letter here, T or P or pretty much anything, but just something short. So we're saying this type here, and T, I like to use that because I think of it as type. So this is going to be an array of type T, where T is going to be either inferred or it's going to be something that the user, so we can assign ourselves. And might be a bit confusing as to what T exactly means right now. But if I hover over this, T is inferred to here as number. So it knows it's number. But if I change this one to a string and I hover over this, T, which is now here, is inferred as a string or a number. And then we take that type here. So string or number array. So T is somewhat, you can think of it as it being dynamically populated with the type that we're supplying here. What we can also do is, using these angle brackets, we can also specify a type here, so string. So now we'll get an error saying type number is not assignable type string. And if we hover over this, the type is now string. So this T here is what we call a generic. And just so you know, we can also use T here. So doing this wouldn't really make sense because we could actually have number here. And then number, this wouldn't be true because this always returns a string. So that's why we don't want to do that. But I just want to show you guys that you can use T as the return type as well. So you'll see this be used quite often because when I'm creating this, I know that when I use it, I can put in any type as long as it's an array, then we can turn it into a string and join them. And just a quick other note, we can also set the generic to be an interface, for example. So it can be an object, or we can set it to type person, and then these would have to be of type person. So I think we deleted all of them. So let's say name, John, age 12. Although it's going to return a string, but it throws object because you can't just convert an object to a string without doing something like JSON encode or JSON decode. Okay, so that was the basics of how we use TypeScript just on its own. Although it's a bit out there and it's not too useful. So instead, what I just want to show you guys is how to use TypeScript with React. So if I go back to the dashboard and I create a new sandbox, we want this React plus TS one. So I'm just going to show you some very simple stuff on how we use it in React. So the first thing you guys might notice that's a little bit different is we have .tsx, and also we're importing React a little bit strangely. So I don't like that. So what I like to do is just change the TS config. So I think here we add, I think it was ES module terp, and just set this to true. So just copy this and add it to your own TS config, and now here you won't get an error anymore. I'm thinking about making a video going through the basics of TypeScript configuration with Webpack, Babel, React. So let me know if you guys want a video on that. Let's just create a very simple project here called, let's add in a h2. Or actually, let's just reuse this. So to do app. Now let's create a functional component. So create a new file, todos.tsx, and then out in here, what we do in a tsx file is very similar to what we do in a normal React file. So we import React from React. We're going to specify the name of the component, export it as default, and now we're going to do a couple of things different. So if you remember, we can set the type of a variable. So in this case, it's a function. We're going to set the type of this to FC, stands for functional component, and we import this from React, and now you can see we're straight away getting an error. That's because our return type is void, because we're not returning anything. But void is not assignable to type React element, string, and it has a bunch of other stuff. So that's just basically JSX is what it's saying. So we have to return some sort of JSX here. My tasks. So now let's import this over here. So to-dos. Okay, so now we have my tasks. So the first thing that's different is we have to specify the type of the component. So in this case, functional component. So next, let's look at the props. So actually, before we do that, let's actually look at use state. So if I create some state here, let's call it tasks and set tasks, and it's going to be equal to react.useState. So this actually accepts a generic. So we can pass it, we can put the angled brackets, and then let's say task. Let's create an interface for this. So of type task, and this is going to have a name of string and a completed, which is just going to be a boolean to let us know whether the task has been done or not. So we can say this is going to have type task, and then we want this to be an array of tasks. So we're just going to put an array next to it, and then initially it's just going to be an empty array. So now let's pass down these tasks, and actually let's create one default one. So there's just a basic default one. And now to pass this down into our component, so we're going to say tasks is equal to tasks. So straight away you can see we're getting an error here, and that's because the tasks that we're passing down are not assignable to the type that a functional component expects, which is intrinsic attributes and children, which are just React nodes. So instead we're going to have to change this. So let's create another interface to describe our props, and then let's just say tasks is going to have this type. So let's just export this, and then let's import it here. So now tasks is going to have a type of tasks array. Oh, and this is actually just task, not tasks. So yeah, a task array. So now what we can do, so this is also a generic, is say fc, the props of this are going to be of type props. And then if we save this and take a look here, we are no longer getting the error. And you can see that if we hover over this, so props.tasks is this type here. It is of type task array, which is the same type that we set our state to. So everything is working fine. All of the types match up. Okay, so let's say I wanted to do props.tasks.map. And you can see we're getting nice autocomplete on this because it knows the type. So it knows this is an array, so it knows that the map method is available to it. And let's just grab the element or the task and the index. And then we're going to return. Let's just say a paragraph tag with the task dot, and then you can see once again we're getting autocomplete. So we have completed a name, and I just want the name. And let's also give this a key of index. Now you can see here we are rendering the task as normal. So I know this isn't any complex React stuff, but this is just the very fundamentals of how TypeScript works in React. So the key things I want you guys to take away from this is we use generics quite a bit. So here we're using it to specify the type of our state. And then when we're passing down props, we create an interface to handle the type of our props, which is also a generic. And I should probably just make this clear. This interface here actually just extends the existing props. So what I mean by that is, let's say here you wanted some children. So children, you can still just normally render props.children. So you can see this still works. And that's because we don't have to go out of our own way and specify children here. It just merges or extends the existing props on FC. So I hope that's clear as well. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was just some pretty basic TypeScript stuff. I can go into more detail on how we would use TypeScript with dependencies and how we have to also import the types of that dependency. So that's for another video. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, subscribe. It really helps me out. Helps me stay motivated to keep making videos as well. If you have any recommendations, let me know, or any criticisms. I would also appreciate that. So let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.